this is Laborc and it is so nice to have you here. These are the paints you need. Okay, first we cover the face and neck area with a mix of ratskin and catachan flesh. Apply 2 thin layers and make sure you wait for the first layer to dry before applying the next one. Leave the eyes black as a pre-black line or just paint them black after your second layer is dried. At this stage I like to paint the eyes because there are no highlights, so we can't really go wrong if I use ice yellow and touch up the model with the previous mixture or black to create the right size and shape for the eye. Now I use ratskin flesh to highlight the skin. I like to experiment with new skin tones, and this desaturated orange really works well for a warmer skin tone. I cover the cheeks, nose bridge, nose tip, brows, forehead and the chin. I cover the nose tip and the ridge separately to give some extra angle to the nose, and I use thin layers to achieve a smooth and easy blend. Then I mix some ice yellow to the ratskin flesh and reduce the highlight areas we previously sketched out. I do not cover the previous layers 100%, so my shadow areas stay visible, and thanks to them the face will have enough contrast. I move the highlights on the forehead to the left as the light is coming from the left. Nowadays I don't really use a highlight reference, I just keep thinking about how the light would hit different surfaces. It's a nice exercise for me, but if you need a highlight reference, just take a photo of the mini when it's primed. Now to reduce the highlight areas, I use a little bit of glaze to mute back the highlights. Not entirely, but usually making small highlights is easier to reduce their size with a lower value color rather than painting a small highlight with a higher value one, at least for me. Lastly, I add a shiny spot on the forehead with ice yellow. On the ID card, Sandman has very dark and brown hair, so I mixed some black with catachan flesh and covered all the surface. To make the hair shiny, I mixed some ice yellow to the catachan flesh and painted the shiny parts, applying a thin line over the hair locks. The shape of the highlight is more like a halo, like the one I painted on the Dr. Octopus miniature. If that's easier for you, you can break up the lines with catachan flesh after you paint the halo shape. I do that as well to tidy up the shape of the highlights. These minis are quite small, so use a magnifying lamp or glasses to help your eyes. Okay, now it's time for the shirt. I guess it can be interesting to highlight something patterned, because at first it might look tricky, but actually it's easy when you understand it. Oh really, Papa Laborc, once you understand something it becomes easy? Who knew? I know. Okay, let's cover the shirt with 2 coats of lupercal green. Make sure you cover it nice and evenly. For the more saturated higher value tone, I mix some orruk flesh to the lupercal green. I cover around 80% of the stripes and I leave most of the surface on the stomach darker. Since the character has a hunched pose, those areas should be darker. Now for the darker green highlights, since I want to have them more desaturated, I mix ice yellow to the angel green and align the highlights to the other green stripes. Since the stripes are different colors, but they are part of the same surface and fabric, we paint the highlights as if it would be one color. Okay, so I create some highlights on the chest and shoulders and all over the back, but you can see that all of the highlights aligned with each other. This way it looks more real. The shirt is heavily textured with the stripes, but don't worry about that because they just designed the mini this way, so it would be easier to paint. Thin down your paint to a glaze consistency and blend the highlights. Remember to wipe off the excess paint on a paper towel every time when you are using glazes. Move the paint from the lower value to the higher value part. And guys, if you don't wait for your layers to dry before applying the next one, you can be sure I will slap on your tiny hand. Gentle and precise movement. I can tell how many layers you need because that depends on the consistency that you are using, but I will give you a reference that you can use all the time, okay? Make it smooth like Granny's butt cheek. To achieve a smoother finish and curb the volumes, we glaze back some of the darker green. This time we move the paint from the higher value to the darker value parts, okay? Blending like this takes time, but the result is going to be super nice. So please take your time if you want to improve your skills. I'm pretty sure that some of you may think that you do not have talent for painting, but it's really more about patience and willingness to spend time to improve your skills. I use pure orruk flash to push the contrast a bit more on the brighter green parts. Thin layers again, and I align the highlights to the other green stripes. This way we highlighted the patterned surface and none of the highlights feel out of place. Use the same glazing method what I did in the previous step, and these stripes will be as smooth as Granny's butt cheek. For the maximum highlights, I mix a little bit of ice yellow to the orruk flash and highlight only the shoulder to keep the focal point around the head. I do the same to the edges and colder green stripes as well and glaze over those highlights with the previous highlight mix. After that I cover all the sand parts and the pants with catachan flash. To highlight the pants I used red leather and applied some highlights with thin layers, picking out the folds close to the groin area and the top half of the thighs. I glaze back some catachan flash to smooth out the transition a bit, moving the paint from the red leather layer to the catachan flash. I grab a dry brush for the sand parts and apply some brown ochre. The brush is not completely dry, I just removed most of the paint on a paper towel. It's not a problem if the paint gets into some of the crevices. Okay? I don't want to get rid of all of the textures, but it's okay to do that here and there. I mix some morghast bone to the brown ochre to highlight the sandy parts. I don't really care much about blending this layer, since sand is rough and creates a nice contrast between the smooth skin and shirt. I go around the edges of the hammer with this color and reduce the highlight areas all over the sand. On the big fist I highlight the fingers and palm from the left, so the highlights will be more consistent with the rest of the mini, since the light is coming from the top left corner. Then I use morghast bone with a dry brush to catch the edges of the shapes, and after that I go back with a brush and reduce the highlight areas. This time the dry brush is completely dry, so it will create a dusty look, which is quite convenient since we are painting sand. With the brush I do some stippling motion to complement the texture of the sand parts. I picked out some of the details of the belt with London grey with some simple horizontal lines. I gave an extra highlight to the left leg with a mix of red leather and ice yellow and blended it in with some glazing. To add some warmth to the sand, I glazed some zamesi desert over the midtones next to the highlights. Lastly, I gave it a coat of matte varnish, 2-part inner, 1-part varnish consistency, and the compressor is set to 5 bar. I'm using Vallejo's matte varnish. You only need a couple thin layers to matte down the surface. The reason I'm doing this is because the catachan flash layer dried a little bit glossy, it making the set look like mud. And the matte varnish will help me fix that problem. With that, Sandman is done and ready for the table. A huge thanks to my Patreons who support these kind of videos. With special shout out to Jonathan Rhodes, Cold Blooded Dawn, Trying to Paint Minis, Jonathan Mosner, One Sharp Joe Crafts, Glitchy McCrash, Guillaume Belanger. If you want to support the work of Papa Laborc, you can do that on Patreon, where you will have some exclusive content, PDF guides, or you can vote on the next mini. I hope the rest of your day will be as smooth as a granny's butt cheek.